What is going on, Sharp Football Fantasy family? It is your resident Swami of Konami, Rich Hribar, and we are here 3 weeks out. Everyone's playing preseason games this week. We're knocking on the door of the NFL season. As a reminder, as you prep for the final few weeks of fantasy football, head over to sharpfootballanalysis.com. You can still order the 2024 football preview book from Warren Sharp and the team over there. You can still sign up for the draft kit that myself and Raymond Summerlin have been pouring tons of hours into and still pouring content in over these past 3 weeks over the remainder of the summer. With the housekeeping out of the way, let me bring in our guest today. It's a fun one. It's going to be a good one here. It's Eric Young from TNA Impact and from FTN Fantasy, all the acronyms that he's working for. Eric, what's going on, brother?
Good to be here, man. Yeah, it's hard to keep all the acronyms straight. And we were Impact Wrestling, and now we're TNA Wrestling, and the show is Impact. And yeah, we're at FTN with Chris Meany and all the guys there. And we were just talking offline. Like I didn't get to make it to the Flex Draft this year, which gutted me. Even the year that we both got our flights canceled, but I did it online. So I'm doing another one online this year, and hopefully I can make it yesterday. I look forward to it every year, but I didn't get to go this year.
Yeah, it's always a good time to meet up with everyone, especially because it's towards, in August where everyone knows the season's coming and you kind of get like that final grouping together before everyone starts going like on their computers all the time and doing all this work in season. And like you hinted upon like earlier on the show, it's like, it's all still nebulous right now. We don't know what's going to happen and how we're going to adjust and calibrate in season. And that's what makes like the summer and fantasy drafts in general so much fun. Well, one of the first things I kind of want to ask before we start talking about like some actual like football players and things is, the fantasy football is getting just more and more popular, across the whole world. I always make the comment that every year I've been doing fantasy football, it's the smallest it's ever been. And we've seen guys like the Miz, who's from my area, in Cleveland, talk about fantasy football. Obviously, you've been doing these flex leagues with myself and like Jake in the industry for a number of years. How popular is fantasy football on the wrestling circuit? Are you in any leagues with guys, and like how much banter and stuff goes on in those leagues?
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, it's really, a lot of the guys are there for the banter. I call those guys donators. They don't make the playoffs, but they're dishing out $500 to be in these 16-team leagues, and they just get smashed every year. I would like to say Miz is a guy that obviously has been doing this and been around it a lot. I don't think he does it as much as he used to, but was kind of like one of the first wrestling guys to kind of show up and had like a show on Sirius Radio, and I always like to say that he's never beat me ever. So
Shots fired.
He's beat me at everything else, but he hasn't been able to beat me at fantasy football yet. So it's a little a feather in the cap. I mean, he's super famous and super rich, and his wife is gorgeous, and he's got beautiful kids. And I suck at everything else, but he still hasn't been able to beat me at football. So, but yeah, it's right at that time. Like it's starting to get the fever pitch. Preseason's underway. I mean, not a lot to take from preseason games anymore, but I will watch every minute, every snap, every single one, because I am insane.
Yeah, and everyone's going to be playing this weekend. One other kind of wrestling related question I want to ask you is, obviously your time in the sport and in the industry, you've done a lot of promos. You've done a lot of talking on the mic. How has that helped you as a fantasy analyst? Has it helped you as a fantasy analyst, like talking about this stuff?
Yeah, I don't know. I think a skill that pro wrestling has sharpened, and something I've always been about, is thinking on your feet. And I think most importantly, draft day, right? Like you could do 6,000 mock drafts and 3 picks in, wrenches in the gears because someone takes Billy Volek in the first round, or it's not that crazy, right? But I mean, people like have their players, and I always say this: it's supposed to be fun. And the players that you believe in, those are the players you should be picking. No matter what some analyst says, or what some stat says, or what they did last year. Because the reality is we're all just making this up. It's a complete guess. People trying to predict strength of schedule and like who's going to be good defenses and who's going to be good offenses. It's a bunch of crap. Nobody knows.
I'm definitely someone that's trying to do some of that stuff, but I always tell people too, like every draft is its own you kind of unique thing. And that's what makes
100%.
you never know what someone's gonna do. You can do 1,000 mock drafts. My father-in-law is what he only plays in one league every year,
Yeah.
and he'll do 100 mock drafts throughout the time. He's like, I got this player, this player, this player. And then when he goes into the draft, he says, that's not how it went. And I'm like, well,
Well, yep. Throw your preparation out the window. Yeah.
exactly. One of the things that we always see this time of the year, because these NFL players are getting in ramp up mode with training camps, trying to geared up towards the regular season. And with that, we start to see some of these players start to pick up some injuries as they ramp up. We see CMC has a calf issue that he's dealing with. We're told it's not major, but he's probably not going to play at all in the preseason. DeAndre Hopkins has a knee strain. He's going to maybe push that into the start of the season. Justin Herbert has plantar fasciitis in his right foot. Josh Downs just picked up a high ankle sprain. I want to tie this into you because you are an actual athlete that we have on the show. So can you share a little bit just like how performance is dictated by injury, and then fold that into your fantasy football, the way you play and how do you handle guys that are like hurt entering the season or hurt during the week, because you know how it is to perform with injury?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing is if they're hurt and they're missing preseason, they're missing practices at this point, I avoid those players completely. Here's the reason why: is the NFL is 1% of 1%, right? Like these are the best athletes in the world. In pro wrestling, I can work around it. I can, if I've hurt my arm, I just tell the guy I'm wrestling that day, don't touch my arm, and he does his best not to touch it. So I'm probably not breaking anyone's bubble. It is predetermined, right? I don't use the word fake because that's nonsense too. Magic's fake. What we're doing is happening, and it's happening in real time. It hasn't been rehearsed. It hasn't been practiced. It's just happening in front of you. And I would say, I think even athletes that get around it, they realize how difficult it is and how physical it is, especially if you see it live. But in the NFL, like if you're half a step behind, a fraction of a step behind, you're useless. You're useless. And I mean, the number one glaring example of it, you can go last year, Joe Burrow. I mean, he was drafted often in the first or second round last year. And, like, oh, it's calf strain. And what did they say? What did Cincinnati say? Oh, he'll be ready to go. He'll be ready to go. He was brutal. I mean, obviously mobility is a huge part of his game. And if he can't do that, he can't move the pocket, he can't roll out, he can't even like turn to hand the ball off and do things like that. Like he's playing at a disadvantage. I mean, Scott Fishbowl, I'm a Puka Nakua guy. I got him on my team and he's already hurt with a knee. They don't even know if he'll play the first couple games. Like that's brutal. Like that cripples that team from the beginning. I was like my first or my second round pick. So, if there's any kind of concern, I just try to go another way because you're setting yourself up for a disaster.
Yeah, and I always make the preference that I'm no doctor, but I'm kind of operating under the same ilk, especially when guys enter the season already injured, like you talked about Burrow, because sometimes you can pick up a secondary injury of compensation or anything. What's the worst injury you've had?
I dislocated my hip in a match. That was, I mean, it just kind of went back in, but that was like the most painful thing I think ever in my life. I've broken fingers. I wrestled with a broken ankle one time. Dislocated shoulder, broken thumbs, cuts, scrapes, and bruises. I mean, all kinds of things. I mean, the truth is, I've been doing it since 1997, and I've only really missed 4.5 months when I tore my ACL. So that's really that's the largest amount of time that I've ever missed. And it was because of an ACL injury. So that wasn't fun. I'm supposed to wear a brace, but I hate it and I don't wear it. All the strength is back. Most of the mobility is back. And the truth is the brace would come unbuckled and like, I hated wearing it. So it was more of a hindrance than anything, but don't tell my surgeon.
No, I won't. So one of the things this week that we've kind of all been waiting on, and I was hoping it was going to happen before the Fantasy Football Expo. Hopefully, watch all of our luck. It'll happen there when all the fantasy communities in one spot and no one can get to their laptops and update projections and rankings and everything. But we've been waiting on this Brandon Aiyuk saga to kind of come to an end, right? It's just been like at this point, like I just want it to be over. I want to know.
Yeah.
So assuming Brandon Aiyuk is traded, How are you handling kind of the fallout first for the 49ers players? And then we'll talk about like maybe some potential landing spots, how we would treat some spots. But for the 49ers players in particular, does this make you want to jam in George Kittle, Deebo Samuel? Are you more hesitant on Brock Purdy? That type of angle?
Yeah, I think this is kind of like outside the box thinking, but Aiyuk and Debo don't. They're both wide receivers, but they play in two different positions, right?
Right.
Samuel plays in the backfield and lines up in the slot most of the time. Aiyuk is the outside guy, and I think the most valuable person, or the person that has the most to gain, is Juwan Jennings. He's been a very good receiver for them, but he's the third guy. They often have two tight ends on the field. A very good mix of run and pass. And they need somebody in that kind of the Mike Shanahan offense to stretch the field, to allow guys to get those open routes underneath. So I think Juwan Jennings, what is it? Is it Purcell is the kid?
Yeah, Purcell.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm terrified of rookies too. Like, I'm willing to be wrong on them by just avoiding them. I'm willing to be wrong in the first year, because the reality is like, in your life of playing fantasy football, how many rookies have really hit? 20? I've been playing fantasy football for 18 years. And I bet you I couldn't name 10. I have a terrible memory and get in the head for a living. But yeah,
a lot of them are running backs, more running backs than receivers. But we have because of the volume, just opportunity. Fantasy football is an opportunity game. So if you got a guy just getting opportunity, he's probably going to turn that into something. Just depends on what the expectations are. Obviously, we've had a couple breakouts from like Odell Beckham and Justin Jefferson like during the season, but like preseason, those were guys that were not being drafted very highly. It's gonna be interesting to see.
Last year,
yeah, Puka
drafted in most leagues.
Yeah, definitely the discount route. I like to fill the back end of my roster out with more rookies and those like flyers. Pearsall is interesting because I've talked about it when they drafted him. Myself and Ryan McChrystal on the website, like, we were trying to figure out like what role he was drafted for in this offense, because he's not a 1-for-1 replacement for Brandon Aiyuk. And he struggled in college a lot to really get open in man coverage. And we've heard some of the reports in early training camp that he struggled with some separation issues too. Ironically, he also got dinged up at practice yesterday and left. But I do think that if Aiyuk is traded, that Juwan Jennings would have a chance to play initial snaps to open the year over Pearsall, probably more than the Pearsall drafters are hoping for. And then he'd be more of a ramp up, try to figure out how he's going to fit into this offense over the season.
They trust him. Right? They trust
clearly
him. When Aiyuk has gone down before, he stepped in. Like, Juwan Jennings is not Brandon Aiyuk, but if he's getting more opportunity, to your point earlier, like, in an offense like that goes, if Christian McCaffrey, already banged up, that's terrifying. I'm not taking him first, and I think that's what it's going to take if you want him. I have him on a couple teams and a bunch of my best ball teams because he wasn't hurt when I drafted him. Well, now he's hurt, and when smaller guys like that are already banged up going into the season, it's just a recipe for disaster, man. So remember, you heard Juwan Jennings here.
Yeah, and CMC's 28, which, to guys like you and I that are in our 40s, I always feel ironic when I call, like, when I'm like, oh, I suggest a player's old, I'm like, oh, come on. But we know running backs, and we know McCaffrey's history, even as pure as he's run with the 49ers over the last year and a half. He is a guy at Carolina. He had a lot of soft tissue injuries. So like, it's hard to discount those things. So you're not taking McCaffrey 101. Who are you taking today?
And it's a cop-out answer, but a lot of it depends on like, if you play in a 2 quarterback league, I like to jump on quarterbacks early in those. If you get 2 really good guys, you're guaranteeing yourself 50 points. It's hard to battle back if you're, especially like, I'm in 2 quarterback leagues, 16 teams. So they go
16
quick.
Teams. Yeah. They're a resource.
Yeah. They go quick. So, I'm thinking about, I like him. I still like him. I think I would still think about it. I don't think it's too serious to be jumping off a cliff yet, but I'm probably going to lean receiver. I think, and I think that kind of goes back and forth every year. I still think that running backs are still the kind of number one commodity. And I don't we see this every year, right? Like, everyone will go after running backs, and then a bunch of those guys get hurt, and they're like, oh, I'm going receiver this year. And it literally is like year to year. And this is definitely a wide receiver year. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on scoring.
I mean, it's a good answer because too many people focus on players instead of sometimes the format they're playing, and the format should dictate how you're assembling your roster.
Everything.
Yeah.
If you're playing in a full PPR league, like, I mean, the guys that are going to catch the ball a bunch are obviously more, are worth more. So, I don't know. To me, I mean, just depends on the scoring. I would probably lean wide receiver. I would obviously think about McCaffrey.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, he's been so good when he's been with the 49ers, but I mean, we've seen the NFL running backs, he said, have kind of like faded off a little bit, and we don't see them. They're like what we talked about, the quarterbacks. They're almost like a finite resource in its own right. So if you pass a McCaffrey, you're basically saying, I'm going to keep going kind of wide receiver heavy to open, because there will be no guys like Christian McCaffrey available to you when you come back. Guys like Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson, who people are projecting to potentially become the next Christian McCaffrey, won't be there. And then you're kind of at
like Jonathan Taylor. Like,
yep.
I know Bijan's the shiny new thing, but new coach, Kirk Cousins wasn't a crazy good athlete coming off a torn Achilles. I think there's one or two players that have ever come back from that and been effective. Like, do we believe that Kirk Cousins and the new coach is the cure-all for Atlanta's players? It was brutal last year. And I understand it's a different coordinator and a different quarterback, but how different is it really going to be? And I think Bijan Robinson has the athletic background to be one of the best to ever do it. The fact that he's splitting carries with Tyler Algier is frustrating and makes you want to smash your head through the wall.
Hopefully we don't have to deal with that to the same degree as last year. But I mean, Algier is also good enough to where he's not going to go away either.
That's right.
That's right. Completely. Where you look at Breece Hall's situation, it's a lot of young players that have not really have any NFL experience. I got a question in the chat here. It's from I'm going to see if I pronounce this right. Merrick Brave or Marique Brave. He says he's your old Iowa tag partner. He said he misses you, but he wants to know, do you think Jalen Waddle is underrated?
Yeah, I remember him. He's dating both of us. That's probably 20 years ago. We tagged together in Iowa. But I think Jalen Waddle is underrated. I think, last year he was hurt almost the entire year, right? Like he just was never right. Tyreek Hill, again, another old guy, gets banged up a lot. And I believe deeply in the Miami offense. I don't think Tua is the best quarterback, but I think he's smart and he's accurate, and just they've got so much speed with Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Devon Achane, and Mostert too. Like, yeah, pick your poison, man. Like, you just can't cover them all, and those guys' speed is it kills in the NFL, and those guys are elite of the elite.
Yeah, and it's still going to be a thin target tree there. They don't really have a third wide receiver. I mean, Jonnu Smith's not going to really compete for targets. He's never been a huge target earner. Let's shift back to the back end of that Aiyuk question, and let's assume right now that we won't go through like every scenario. We'll just talk about what's thought to be the front running situation is that he would land with the Pittsburgh Steelers. If he lands with the Steelers, how much do you think that hurts a guy like Brandon Aiyuk, and how much would you want to either buy the dip or avoid a guy like George Pickens in that situation?
Yeah, I think it hurts Pickens most of all. I think Pickens is athletically, like, he's a freak. I think he's got good hands, but from what I understand from, reading stuff on reception perception and reading stuff about him, he's not a great route runner. He's, all the athletic things are there, but he's not refined as a receiver. So people think about all these miraculous, body control catches and jumping up. If you're good, you don't have to do those kind of things, because you're open. He's got to make these kind of crazy laying out catches. I mean, part of that is Kenny Pickett, that's the other part of it. Is Russell Wilson way better? I don't know.
Yeah, not at this. Him and Justin Fields at this stage.
Yeah, I don't think so. Justin Fields Chicago threw him away. Like, they couldn't get away from him quick enough. He's not the answer either. So I think Aiyuk going there would be a mistake for him. San Fran is, one of the best offenses in the league. Not a team that throws it a ton, but if they're going to throw it deep, they throw it to him. Competing with Pickens, and Firemouth is definitely underneath guy. There's a bunch of buzz about Calvin Austin coming out, which I have him on a Dynasty team, so that's exciting for me. That's how sick I am. Like, I'm rooting for Calvin Austin to do something.
There's definitely some people out there still too. I mean, it's the whole Aiyuk situation is really baffling on a number of levels. Maybe there's just stuff behind closed doors that's just the relationship is just something that can't be mended, because he's the perfect fit for like scheme and talent, like where he is. Everything he does well, because he's really great on everything in breaking. He runs a lot of posts, a lot of digs, all that stuff over in the middle of the field when the 49ers are sucking up the defense and they're throwing over the middle of the field. And throwing over the middle of the field has been one of the worst parts of Russell Wilson and Justin Fields' games, especially as the defensive meta has kind of shifted and teams are playing more zone coverage and everything. So, I mean, it's a really tough fit. Pair that with like Arthur Smith and just the amount of like you talked about the 49ers don't throw the ball a lot. Well, Arthur Smith's never thrown the football a lot ever at any stop he's ever been in. So it's putting him in a situation where, yes, he still would probably still have reduced targets and in a less efficient and offensive environment. So everyone kind of loses in that scenario. Which is really kind of hard to figure it out there. But yeah, it would be really down. And I like the drop there too. The Eric Young's reading reception perception. So, a little shout out to Matt Harmon there, friend of all of ours. I love it. You kind of already hinted on that you are still more of like if you can run into like one of those bell cow running backs, you like to approach it that way. So I was curious, how you're starting off drafts this year. Are you trying to get a Jonathan Taylor, a Saquon to open things up and then start drafting wide receivers? Or are you finding yourself caught in that tidal wave and saying, if I'm not taking a wide receiver, then like I'm also going to be drafting wide receivers that aren't as good later on?
Yeah, I think if I can get up until this point, McCaffrey was obviously my one. Now I think I would argue, like Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, I think are in there. Those are two guys that I really like. I think people are forgetting how good Jonathan Taylor was when he was healthy. And if they've got Richardson there, like, who do you cover, right? Like, I mean, you can't spy the quarterback and cover a guy running a sweep at the same time. It's just the personnel doesn't match up. So I think if Richardson can even throw decent and run half as good as he did to start the year last year, Jonathan Taylor is going to be really, really good. You would mention Breece Hall. I love him too. I mean, if they get even mediocre quarterback play from Aaron Rodgers, he's going to be a savage.
Yeah, the bar is really low to be better than.
Yeah. I mean, like Wilson was abysmal. Like Joe Flacco looked like a superstar comparatively. It was a mess. It was an absolute mess. So I think even if he's 75% of what Aaron Rodgers was, like a couple years ago, I think they're going to be very good. I'd like to get one of those guys. And if I don't, then I'd like to get two really reliable receivers early. Again, it's all like dependent on the scoring and the format. If it's two quarterbacks, of course, like you got to get those guys early because they go quick and you don't want to have, you don't want to be trusting Deshaun Watson or, someone like that is, I mean, Deshaun could be very good this year, but we haven't seen high-level Deshaun Watson in 3 years plus. So
right.
I'd be willing to bet that he's not the player that he was.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. A lot of people may not know this because they're not as old as you and I, or maybe they've just been following your career long enough to know, but you used to host a fishing show on Animal Planet.
I did.
Yeah. It was called Off the Hook. So I'm going to put you on too. I want to give me a player that you want on your hook this year, and then give me someone you're trying to throw back.
Yeah. I mean, CeeDee Lamb I think if I was going to say one receiver, that's the guy I want. I don't know why it took McCarthy so long to figure it out. Like maybe we should just throw it to him a whole bunch, but that seems like a really good idea. Obviously there's a connection between him and Dax. Like there's a real connection there. I think he might be, arguably the best receiver in the league. He does everything well. Good speed, great hands, great body control, unbelievable routes. Like he's the complete thing. And Dallas's defense, I think, looks to be worse than it was last year, and they're going to have to score. And I know that's like a crutch thing to say, but it's just true, right? They're not going to run it 30 times with Rico Dowdle and Ezekiel Elliott. they're going to throw the ball and they're going to supplement that with running the ball short sometimes. So CeeDee Lamb, I think, would be my first receiver that I would take off the board. So that's definitely somebody I want on the hook. And off the hook, I'm too late now, but Puka Nacua having a knee injury before the games have started. Draft Cooper Kupp. That's the second tip of today.
Draft a guy that's not hurt in the same offense. Yeah, it's tough, man, because Puka was a guy I loved as a prospect coming out, and it was so awesome to see him hit in year one. And then, kind of is already, because in college, he was a guy that had a plethora of injuries, and that's what kind of held him back from like really exploding in college. He had a ton of lower body injuries over his last 2 years in college, and it kind of forced a lot of missed time for him. So he plays that style too, where he's a battering ram as a wide receiver.
Yep.
Like he's a rugged wide receiver. Like he's not one of those guys flying over people. He's taking those shots and, taking those hits. So it is really a bummer to see him start the year already hurt. But like you said, there's that gaggle of like wide receivers, like right around where he goes. And it's like, it's hard to force the issue to say like, all right, I'm going to take the guy based off of his rookie season. We don't get those stats last year. We don't get last year's stats. Unfortunately, they don't get to come over to this year. And you're taking guys that are potentially healthier all around him, or avoiding those healthier players over him. So it's just really hard. It's a way to break ties for sure. Absolutely. Do you have any any of these? You play in a lot of dynasty leagues. Do you have any of these? You said you kind of avoid rookies in redraft, but do you have any of these like younger players that like maybe are lower on the draft board that you are interested in drafting? Like you're like middle round guys or something. You're saying like, oh, like I always grab Tajay Spears or someone like that.
Yeah, I mean, I like Tajay Spears. I mean, for me, it's personal. I grew up a Michigan fan. My wife is a psycho. Like ruined one of the days on her vacation because they lost to TCU. And she can probably hear me. She's in the other room. But Blake Corum in Los Angeles, like, look, I mean, Kyren Williams was unbelievable, but like he's not going to be that as efficient as he was last year. He's got knee problems too. He's bone on bone in one of his knees. So even if he's good, he's only going to be good for a short amount of time. Not a massive guy. I mean, look, Kyren Williams, he ran like a savage last year. There's no doubt about it. But the guy behind him, I believe, will be Blake Corum. He's young, he's sturdy, he can catch the ball, he can do all the things that Williams can do. I think overall is probably a better back. Sean McVay does this. He'll fall in love with a player, and then that guy will carry the load until he's hurt or he falls in love with somebody else. But I think injury risk for Kyren Williams, all running backs, they get hit on basically every play, whether they're blocking or they're running. So it's, having him like late, it could be a good grab. Trying to think of some other guys. I think, he's not a rookie, but the second year is Aiden O'Connell for the Raiders. They're not going to throw the ball a ton, but I think he's a better quarterback than Minshew. I know I'm supposed to like Minshew because he's wild and he's funny and he's got a cool mullet and all this other stuff, but he would be starting somewhere if he was that good. And I think O'Connell didn't get a fair shake last year. He's a guy that I liked coming out of college. And I think if they do, not throwing the ball a ton, but he needs to make the throws when he needs to make the throws, I think Aiden O'Connell could be pretty serviceable this year.
Yeah, the Raiders are an interesting team. I like the shout about Corum. Obviously he's a guy that's gotten some steam because, Kyren Williams, but we have the two running backs last year that kind of everyone boosted up this year, and Devin Achane and Kyren Williams. And a lot of people don't realize they're a lot closer in size because their play style is different. Kyren Williams plays like a guy that you think is 220 pounds. That's the way he runs, but he's 194 pounds, 5'9", 194 pounds. And we saw not only last year, but his rookie year, he was hurt. He came out, he had 3 different injuries last year. He was hurt at Notre Dame. So like a lot of people don't realize that size factors into the equation, and the Rams just aren't going to have to give him the workload they gave him last year because the running backs behind Kyren Williams were so bad. A lot of people forget they started the year at Cam Akers and they traded Cam Akers.
Blasted him into the sun.
Yep. And when they traded away Cam Akers and Kyron Williams got hurt that first time, they had nobody. It was Ronnie Rivers and Zach Evans. And they didn't trust Zach Evans. They brought Daryl Henderson back off the street. They brought Royce Freeman back in, and those guys were abysmal. So anytime Kyron played, he had to just carry this immense workload. And even if he's playing this year and doesn't get hurt, that workload's going to naturally be reduced because they have a better player to get him off the field and kind of just alleviate the workload he had. So even if Corum doesn't take over as like the full RB1, he's going to be involved, I believe, into the base offense anyways, just because they didn't have anybody else at all. I'm gonna shift back here to another question that one of the guys on our staff wanted me to ask you, because it ties into fantasy and then kind of wrestling as well. Obviously, us in the fantasy industry, we work all for different sites, but we collab all the time. I go on Evan's show, he comes on mine. We're doing thing. You're at FTN, you're coming on this show. And we haven't really seen that, in the wrestling world, right? We saw a little bit. AEW did like the Forbidden Door with New Japan. TNA is involved now with WWE and specifically their NXT brand. You've obviously been in both NXT and the WWE main roster before. So how big of a deal has this been for TNA so far, and how do you see this relationship going? I mean, could you be coming back to WWE?
Yeah, I mean, I think wrestling fans, win the most, right? This is, something that's been going on for 30 years. Like, oh, what if this guy was in this place, and what if he just showed up, and contractually, and none of the, the other, companies got along, so you just weren't allowed to cross over. And it was a big deal when someone's contract would expire, then you'd show up in another, like Bret Hart showing up in WCW or whatever it was. The deal between TNA and WWE right now it's really cool, man. It's people talking, and the possibilities are endless. Obviously, I had a pretty good run in NXT. Got tons of friends there. Would love to show back up. Whether I do or not, that's above my pay grade, man. Like I just, I just show up and do the work. But obviously there's all kinds of ideas that are being floated by wrestling fans. Tons of talk backstage about what if we did this and what if we did that. So it's just a really exciting time to be part of that deal. And, whether I've been directly, I've known about it probably longer than almost anybody. I was on a few of the early calls and was a familiar face for Triple H and stuff. So, yeah, it's just a cool thing for wrestling, the wrestling world and wrestling fans, and a cool thing for us to think about. And, obviously they're the big fish and we're the little fish, and helping grow, both audiences, because the NXT has got a bunch of people that are, great athletes and stuff, but in the wrestling world, there's a lot of them that aren't really known by anybody. So getting out there and getting experience and being seen by different fans and exposing yourself to different audiences is a great thing for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine there's a direct trickle down too from something as big as the WWE, that if you're a fan of the WWE, obviously you might just be that, but it trickles down all the way to to the lower ranks of where wrestling is now. So being able to just see those people come and work together and finding a way to where it makes business sense too, to get everyone involved. I think it's a win-win kind of for all around, because for years, you always wanted to see, like, all right, I would love to see, this wrestler against this wrestler. What could they bring? It'd be a great, great match. And, we don't always get to see that. So that'd be awesome if we can get to see that. Back in the day, WWE had their own fantasy game. I don't remember this.
Oh, yeah.
And so we probably will never be able to get wrestling into like the betting world, at least not specifically like the higher end stakes betting world, because like you kind of hit upon, like the results are known, even though the product is real. But do you think that there'd be a new appetite for a fantasy professional wrestling league, and like how would you go about setting it up?
Yeah, I think the gambling world has opened up, the floodgates all over again, right? I mean, you can remember this happening in fantasy football, maybe 10, 11 years ago, where like all of a sudden, like everybody you knew was playing fantasy football or fantasy sports of some kind. And now sports gambling is like almost out of control. If I'm, trying to be a good, as a person who works directly in it, like me and Chris Meany's show on FTN is, Dangle Bet Selly does very well in the gambling world. It's gambling based. obviously tons of fantasy information too, but you know, the big elephant, the elephant in the room is that everybody is betting on sports. And I mean, the truth is you can bet on the Oscars and you can bet on,
Yep.
I mean, almost everything. And
That's a good point, because there's people that know the Oscar outcome before.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're gambling on who's going to show up in Marvel movies. They're going to, and I know like there is wrestling gambling in some countries. I don't think it's legalized here yet in North America, but I know overseas it is a thing that goes on, which is wild.
Yeah, it'd be cool if we started to get like a wrestling statistics site, right? And then you could use those for like a fantasy site, because it doesn't have to be necessarily betting. It could be fantasy related, and it's not always tied to the results. It could be something like submissions or run-ins, or I don't know, just whatever goofy things like that.
Someone will figure it out, right? Because I mean, the reality is the gambling world and sports gambling. This is the tip of the iceberg. It's just starting. Like it's really only legal in 25 states. So, maybe not even that many at this point. So eventually these other states are going to see these other states making all this money on sports gambling, and they're going to jump on board just like everybody else. So sports gambling is everywhere. Like you'd have to be dead or not own a television to not know what DraftKings is or not know what FanDuel is, and MGM, and on and on and on and on. Like you're just being bombarded by it, especially if you're a sports fan of any kind. And it's literally the tip of the iceberg. And that's part of, the excitement of being with FTN is it's a new company. It's, we're right at the precipice of sports gambling blowing up and being this, it's already massive, and it's the tip of the iceberg. So it's a cool thing, man.
Yeah, that's awesome. You missed the flex draft, like you said, and SummerSlam was that night. You were working at another show, and we found a way to make bets on each match, how many 2 counts there would be. We did over-unders on how many 2 counts would be in the match. Like, all right, is there going to be set the line at 3.5 2 counts, and then we were fired up, and we were doing bets based off of that, having a good time with that. You're in Nashville. You're in Nashville now, right? You're right there. So, I mean, are you a Titans guy?
Yeah. It's funny how it happened. I was a Buffalo Bills fan growing up. I grew up in Canada, so where I grew up, we didn't have cable or satellite. Like I had an antenna in my yard, and I had like 9 channels. So football for me was Detroit, and they had one good player, Barry Sanders, or the unbelievable Buffalo Bills with Kelly and Andre Rison and Thurman Thomas, and they were unreal, and they just would,
the K guns.
Of course, I'm young, and they go to 3 Super Bowls in a row and lose, and I cried, and I said, I just can't be a football fan anymore. I'm done with this. And I stopped watching football for about 2 or 3 years. I still played Madden and played video games, but I stopped watching it. And then I was like, well, I'm going to pick a new team. And I just basically picked it through playing Madden, and I love the Tennessee Titans. I love Steve McNair. Eddie George was my favorite player. Love Frank Wycheck, the tight end, and weird turn of events. He's a diehard wrestling guy. He passed away about a year ago, but just loves wrestling. I ended up training him so he could wrestle in a match here on a pay-per-view that we had, and we became really, really close. I'd go on his morning show. Really good guy. So yeah, I was a Tennessee Titans fan before I moved here, and then I ended up through a weird turn of events. I ended up moving here in 2004, and still a Titans fan. That's like my team, but I watch all the games. I have a kinship with Detroit Lions too, because I'm close, grew up close to there, and tons of my wife's family still live in Michigan. They're all diehard Lions fans. So that would be like my other team, I guess. And then sometimes I buy hats because I like them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny that Wycheck and the Bills have that overlap, because he threw the Music City Miracle. He was the one that threw the pass to Kevin Dyson, of the lateral. Was it a lateral? The whole thing, that's so good. I love it. There's like a whole sports science thing dedicated to this. Like, was it one fraction of a degree over? You grew up, we're the same age, and I grew up the same era of football where really the only games on TV were I was in Cleveland, so the Browns were on, but when another AFC team was on, it was always the Bills, and that team was really fun and doing things. And they had Darryl Talley too, and he wore Spider-Man armbands. Do you remember this? He wore and I think it was the coolest thing. He wore Spider-Man arm sleeves. And I thought that was like the coolest shit ever. I was like, look at this dude. He's Spider-Man out here. It was like, it was the coolest thing. But I wanted to pin that in. So the Titans obviously are going through like this huge overhaul in terms of like philosophy. Derrick Henry's gone, who was literally like the face of the franchise for like the modern era. Vrabel's gone, and they bring in Brian Callahan. Obviously, D-Hop is injured now to start the year. But how are you thinking the Titans, this transition is going to be for them? One, losing Derrick Henry, and then maybe potentially opening it up. How do you think this shakes out for potential fantasy value in real life on the field this year?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, at least it's interesting to think about. Like I don't know if they're going to be any good. I think it comes down to, can they keep Will Levis from getting killed? It is the real thing, right? Their offensive line last year was brutal. I don't think they did a whole lot to improve it. I think it's not going to be very good again this year. But nobody knows that until the games start happening. It's a 5-man unit, so I guess we'll see. The Pollard signing is a strange thing because I think Tajay Spears is like a younger, better version of what Tony Pollard does. So I think you're going to see both of them on the field a ton. Sometimes I think you're going to see them on the field together. Will Levis has every tool, right? He's one of those guys where like when sometimes you'll see him, he'll drop down and he'll roll out and he'll fire a ball across the middle of the field, and you're like, God, like it take your breath away. And then the next play, it looks like he's playing blindfolded. So it's a hard thing as a Tennessee Titans fan, but I'll say like Hopkins being banged up, he's at the tail end. He came out and said, he's never had more fun. And look, it's a great city to live, and he's rich and does whatever he wants. But I don't care if you're having a good time. I want you to be a good football player. That's as a fan. And Calvin Ridley, I guess we'll see. At one point was very good. Again, another one of those guys that has every tool, but really was only able to put it together in 1 year, one season there with Matt Ryan in Atlanta. Was brutal for the Jaguars. Is Will Levis better than Trevor Lawrence? I wouldn't bet on that.
You're right.
I wouldn't bet on that at all. But I think Tony Pollard could be really interesting. Like last year was like his year, but he went into the season banged up and was hurt almost all year. So did we see the real Tony Pollard? I mean, you can remember this 2-3 years ago. People were screaming for Tony Pollard.
I was one of them. So
you were one of them.
I lived that life.
And so was I. And so was anybody that watched the games. Like Ezekiel Elliott looked like he was running in porch, and Tony Pollard, every time he touched the ball, looked like he was shot out of a cannon. Well, he got his chance last year and didn't do anything. He was objectively bad, bad running back, and because of the cost of getting him, like you had to take him in the first or second round, and it crippled your team. So people that had him last year are going to be staying away from him. I think where he's going, he could be a very good very good value. I think Tajay Spears could be a very good value. But I think it comes down to, can Will Levis facilitate all of those people, all of the skill position players, and get the ball in their hands? And I think part of it is, can he see those passes? Can he make those passes? And can the offensive line keep him from getting cut in half? But it's exciting. I can tell you that it's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, they're a team that they're kind of a team that I feel like there's not going to be any middle ground on. They're going to be like, they're going to look like,
they're going to be bad.
Right. It's either going to be a train wreck and a dumpster fire, or it end up just being better than we thought, where it just kind of is cohesive, or just, it comes together. They're in the right division still too. I mean, that division is still, although it's definitely improved the past, 5 or 6 years, but
think about the quarterbacks that they got to play. CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, and Trevor Lawrence, like, 3 first-round guys coming out of the draft. Like, maybe it would have been better off just to be bad. Like, are you going to beat CJ Stroud? Can you? Dude's a winner. He proved it last year. I think he'll be better this year. I think people are saying he's going to regress and he's not going to throw as many touchdowns. It's like, I don't know. He was a rookie. Tell me the last time there was a rookie quarterback that played that well.
Yeah, his numbers could still come down. He still plays really good functional football,
Really
right?
good.
Like
That's right.
that's a thing that matters for fantasy football, right? Like we care about the overall numbers, but he could throw 5 fewer touchdowns and still play excellent football. Like,
They could win every game, and he throws 10 less touchdowns.
Right. Absolutely. I think from a talent, it's undeniable, especially going back to Ohio State. Hey, Michigan did beat him. So, you know, he did lose one to Michigan for you. So
I know all about it. I was in Michigan with my wife's family, and it's one of my favorite sports memories of my life. Even if they're terrible, the only thing that matters is if they beat Ohio State. And
that's literally this whole area that does the same thing inversely for us too. I'm not an Ohio State fan. I have a ton of friends though. There, I lived in Columbus area, and it's the same thing. You know, because everyone schedules events around that game. Like
100%.
Marriages. If you're getting married in November, the first thing is you gotta look. You
when is it on the schedule?
Yeah, man. If you're, you know, you gotta plan. You can't be having any sex around the 9-month mark around there. You can't have any babies there. It's like that's how this area in the Michigan area treats that football game, and that's pretty cool in college in general. They have those just massive rivalries, and the NFL does have some rivalries, but it's nowhere near because the player movement. The player movement makes it a lot different, right? Like, you know, we had Steelers Ravens recently that had like a good run, and still kind of is a rivalry, but it's not one that it's not like, it doesn't have cachet like that. I mean, you still have like, you know, Bears, Packers, and things like that are like throwback, like uniform matchups or like area matchups, but like they don't have the cachet of those college rivalries at all. No, that was great, man. It was great to have you on here. Why don't you let the people know what is going on at FTN and TNA too? Don't be scared. We got plenty of overlap here.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is like we're all just nerds, you know, and we can exist in both worlds. I mean, as far as you know, TNA wrestling on Access TV, there's a show every Thursday. We do PLEs and big pay-per-views, you know, at least one a month. If you're not a wrestling fan and you see us, like we're in Spartanburg, we're in Fayetteville, I think we're in Michigan coming up. Like, if you're not a fan, just go to one live show. It will change your opinion. I'm not saying you're going to become a diehard and waste 30 hours of your week watching it, like a lot of other people, but I think it'll change your opinion on it. It's a really cool thing, and TV does it no justice. As far as the FTN stuff, like it's a new company, but there's tons of super talented, you know, super sharp, really bright sports betting and fantasy minds over there. Chris Meany is one of my best friends in the industry and in the world. And we'll do some bet set spike. We'll do some previews of fantasy stuff this year, and then we'll dive right into the hockey. We'll do 2 shows every Tuesday and Thursday. You can watch it on YouTube. You know, obviously you can watch it live. It's betting based, but it's just really just about me and him talking about how much we love the NHL and hockey. And I know hockey isn't for everyone. Again, it's the same thing. If you've never watched it live,
do it live.
The best live sport, and you can't change my mind. I like watching it on TV can be difficult. I know everything about it, so you know I can pick apart formations and why they're playing this way and lineups and this, that, and the other. But if you're a casual person, watching hockey on TV is brutal. It's so fast. It's hard to follow. Guys are changing live, and it's really hard to watch. Watching it live will change your opinion on hockey, and I'm almost willing to bet you become a hockey fan if you watch it live. So definitely a great date-driven league still. But yeah, check out all that stuff. If you follow me, I'm Eric Young on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. It'll always be Twitter to me. I don't give a shit about Elon Musk.
Always.
I don't know if I'm allowed to swear or not, but we'll always be Twitter. I know it's X, but it's both to me. Instagram, I'm the Eric Young or the Eric Young IG on Instagram. So I'm terrible at social media. I do what I can. Send me questions, or you can make fun of me and my lack of hair. Or, I mean, whatever. I probably won't read it, but if I do, sometimes I respond. I'm terrible at it.
As someone who's hung out with you in person and can attest to how large your arms are in person, I don't think anyone's going to be going that route at all.
No,
that's good stuff. I would love to pitch, you know, trying to get you and Jeremy Wade back on the boat. We could try to get you guys River Monsters bring back River Monsters off the hook, something.
One of my fondest memories was that up front with Jeremy Wade, a super cool guy. And
He seems like an awesome guy.
We drank like 10 glasses of whiskey one night and had the best time ever. And I don't really know it. I don't really know anything about fishing. I don't own a fishing rod. It was just a TV show that I got. But diving into that world, there's tons of super interesting people in it, and he was amazing, man. I'd hang out with him again if given.
Yeah, I mean, I watched that show because of him. I thought he was just
He's cool.
He has just like a really good life vibe, just like, yeah,
Yep.
I could totally see that. I'm really jealous.
And the guy that you see on TV, it's the real guy, man. He's awesome. Yeah, he's awesome.
No, that's awesome. As a reminder to everyone, head over to sharpfootballanalysis.com where you can order the 2024 football preview book, and you can still sign up for the draft kit over these final 3 weeks. If you're doing these drafts, everyone's got them scheduled for like Labor Day weekend and stuff like that. Check out the stuff myself and Raymond Summerlin are putting out of the site. Thanks again to Eric Young. I'm Rich Hribar. Till next week, gamers.